Okay, I want to bring this one up because Matt McEwen in the chat, big time contributor to the show. What do they call themselves? Comment creators.
I
He
love
sent this to me. He sent this to me in a DM, and I really like this because it's interesting. We have this conversation a lot about the offense where we say, well, they drafted these receivers and they started throwing more in the playoffs. It's clear to see that they're trying to angle and become more of a pass first team. And maybe that might be true, but that's a conversation that has been had a lot. One conversation that hasn't been had that I've heard, and Matt brought this to my attention, and I think it's a great conversation, which is, can we kind of say the same thing about the defense? Where maybe their philosophy is changing on the fly. Yes, they have very good defensive linemen. You look at the starting four, or at least three of the starting four, you're talking about very good players. But one thing we've been used to with this team is a lot of depth as well. That seems to have dissipated a bit. But what has happened is there's a lot of talent in the secondary and now seemingly a lot of depth in the secondary. Are they potentially shifting the philosophy on defense from, hey, we need an elite game changing D line to maybe it's better to have a better secondary and build off of that? What do you think?
I tend to agree. Number one, if anything, it makes me feel better about how I feel about our defensive line. I do feel like it's kind of like a sum of all parts. I don't see the syntax of what we usually used to do with being able to have a strong, basically first wave, if you will, where we had a strong first four and then we kind of build off of those guys behind. Off of that, I don't really see that this year. I kind of see Nick Bosa and everybody else. Quite honestly, even Javon, you could throw Javon Hargraves into that mix as well. So I have been worried about how they're really going to, number one, replace the size that we lost out of Javon Kinlaw and Eric Armstead. And even though it wasn't the best, it was good, the run support that we did have. Now, what makes me a little even more worried is the kid that we played. What's his name? Evan Stevenson, the kid, the D tackle, the UDFA that we just paid.
Oh, yeah.
I
I
think it's
forget his name.
Evan Anderson or something. But man, we paid that kid 380 grand as a UDFA. They for
You know, do you
sure,
realize the biggest UDFAs that they've paid the last couple of years haven't made the team?
bro, it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. Like, so like they paid this kid uh 380 grand. And for me, it's reminiscent to them thinking that they're just the smartest guys in the room right now, where we're not going to draft out of this D line. I mean, out of this draft class. We're going to do the best we can in the offseason. Yeah, Evan Anderson out of Florida Atlantic. We're going to do the best we can out of free agency. But what I do feel like is I do see it's like monkey see, monkey do so much, like, so to speak. The Chiefs, they had a sum of all parts at D line with one stud, you know what I'm saying, as Chris Jones. But what they had in spade is a secondary, right? They had their secondary together. You is look at the Ravens. We played against the Ravens. They have a stout offense, they have a stout defensive line, but really how they're made is by their secondary, right? They got strong guys on the secondary who can handle all of these multiple offenses that they're seeing when they're getting spread out from time to time. And maybe the Niners are starting to bend the knee a little bit with understanding that they need to start operating their defense from the back end to the front, not the front end to the back. And also some tea leaves of that could be the fact that this is 2 years in a row where the Niners have gone with secondary defensive coordinators, right? So Wilkes and Sorensen. So right now, the first 2 years of not the first 2 years, but the first two guys were linebackers coaches, right? Not necessarily dealing with the D line. And to be quite honest, if you think about it, as far as our defense is concerned, like throughout the years, like the D line has always kind of been like its own thing anyway. like Coach Kaseric and those guys, they kind of they're like their own entity inside of the defense, right?
Yeah.
So honestly speaking, I feel like at one point we were pumping as much money as we could into the position or into the room as possible. But I feel like now that Nick has made that like quote unquote blockbuster deal, there's not a lot of meat left on the bone down there, and they kind of have to move a certain way, which is going to be in a sense, I feel like there's a little bit of planned obsolescence. So, they already know that these guys aren't going to last.
Yeah, I'm going to take the same approach that I am with this pass first offense. I'll believe it when I see it. Maybe they are, and maybe it's a smart pivot to go heavy secondary to compete with some of these wide receiving corps, and knowing that teams are passing more than ever, especially in the playoffs. Maybe it's great. Kyle Shanahan's going to switch up his philosophy and go 3 wide receivers more often, and even go empty 5 wide for Brock Purdy. All those things sound great, but I gotta see it to believe it. Now, what I will say is they now have the depth in the secondary to switch up their philosophy from time to time, if that's the route that they want to go, to put on more defensive backs on the field. They could go dime if they want to. They certainly can run heavy nickel a lot more. You could see 4 corners on the field at a time. Like, there's a lot of versatility you can have there, especially if some of these guys can blitz, but I'll believe it when I see it. I think that, especially here in Sorensen talk, sounds like their philosophy is still their philosophy, and it's just finding a way to continue to get better with their philosophy. So I don't know. I think it's nice. I also see a situation where they have a lot of free agents next year. So taking a Renardo Green and trying to develop some of these younger guys, maybe from last year's draft, are going to be important to know and replace these guys on the fly. I'm curious to see who doesn't make this team, though, because there are some players that we frankly haven't even really had a chance to see a lot. The Darrell Luter Juniors, the Womacs, the guys that they brought in as free agents, plus Renardo Green. Who doesn't make this team? Because all of a sudden that secondary room is very, very full.
Well, I mean, they're going to have to they're still going to have to figure out who their best guys are. I still would like to understand how they're going to move forward with, the best talent that they need to put on the field at once. I haven't seen him play, but I would be very surprised if Malik Mustafa does not start. I believe that Malik Mustafa, Jair Brown, Mooney Ward, Demo, and I feel like the fight at slot is going to be Ronaldo Green, maybe Isaac Yadam, and maybe Darrell Luter Jr., or maybe they swap that. But we have more than enough corners to figure out. Like, at this stage of the game, you can only have but so many people in the room, right? So it's up to the scouting department to make it right, to get it right. And then it's up to the coaches to pull it out of them. So really, we've made our move at secondary, and we'll see. But I have seen the concerted effort at them going stronger at secondary. And you could look at it as, maybe they're trying to change their philosophy. And I see where Matt's coming from. Like, that's a dope take. But maybe some of it could be they're just tired of the talent that they have. And it's just like, man, we're just gonna brute force this thing, put as many guys in there, and Hunger Games this thing. To the victor goes the spoils. Whoever wins, fight for your life. So they really might just be trying to just really put as much candidacy in there as possible. But I do see one of the biggest things that they are doing, before I kind of move off of this topic, they're definitely planning for either Mooney Ward to leave or Demo. And I think it's more along the lines of Mooney.